As a young feminist, I'm continually inspired by women's struggles to control their bodies and their lives. The struggle for reproductive rights is an iconic feminist issue that is still a key agenda item in today's mainstream women's rights movement. Mostly comprised of white feminists, the movement focuses heavily on the pro-choice argument for the right to not have a child, or more popularly known as the right to an abortion. Focusing solely on this right isolates the concerns of a large group of women in the U.S., millions of women of color across the country. Women of color are not only interested in the right to not have a child, but they are equally concerned about their right to have children and to raise them with dignity. Beyond reproductive rights, women of color are concerned with reproductive justice. Reproductive justice is an important issue for women of color because they have been systematically prevented from even having children. Examples of this include the sterilization of Mexican origin women in the 1970s and the criminalization of Black women's reproduction in the 1980s. In the late 1960s through the early 1970s, Mexican origin women were coerced into being sterilized by multiple doctors at the Los Angeles County Medical Center. Responding to the national concerns about overpopulation and poor women's use of welfare services, the doctors took on the responsibility to address these issues through their medical practices. Sterilization abuse was also driven by the belief that Mexican women's children were unfit to be American citizens. While various groups of marginalized women were targeted for reproduction control, women of Mexican origin had unique barriers because of their immigration status. Doctors used this fear and threatened deportation in attempts to coerce women of Mexican origin into signing consent forms for sterilization. The coercion of women of Mexican origin is only one of the many examples of how they were denied the right to have a child. They were also coerced into signing consent forms without a sufficient interpreter or during labor while they were under medications and in pain. Following the sterilization abuse of Mexican origin women, we would see more reproduction control of another marginalized group of women in the United States. In the mid-1980s through the 1990s, the supposed crack epidemic would be the reason for denying Black women reproductive freedom. State legislators alleged that there were thousands of crack babies being born who were emotionally impaired and neurologically damaged. As a result, across 34 states, bills were drafted and implemented to criminally punish prenatal substance abuse. Black women who were charged for using drugs while pregnant were offered contraception as an alternative to jail time. White drug-addicted mothers did not have the same number of such conditions. These policies were a direct attack on the reproductive rights of Black women because if they had chosen to abort the pregnancy, then they would not have been charged as harshly. As scholar Dorothy Roberts argues in Killing the Black Body, it is the choice of carrying a pregnancy to term that is being penalized. Black women have been limited in their right to have a child and parent with dignity because of the prejudices in the criminal justice system that punish them for having children. This country has a history of deciding who is fit and unfit to parent, and women of color are constantly written off as the latter. Instead of women of color fighting for the right to not have a child, that right has been forced upon them. The history of the right to have children shows that a one-issue approach in feminist movements is not enough to address the problems of so many women in the country. Women of color's need for reproductive justice as a human right is essential to providing reproductive rights to all women in this country. While mainstream feminism continues to fight for the right to an abortion, they must not forget that reproductive justice cannot be true justice until every woman of every color has control over all of her reproductive rights.